Let me share a little background. I was dating a girl during my senior year of high school. I'm 20 now, so this was a couple of years ago, but it's still quite fresh in my memory. For privacy reasons, I won't use her real name. I'll call her Grace. Grace and I met through work, which I now recognize is never a good starting point. Although, before we started dating, there were warning signs I simply shouldn't have overlooked. For example, she would spend hours at our workplace just watching me work, and I'd occasionally catch her staring at me. Besides that, a few months into our relationship, things turned quite toxic. I constantly felt suffocated. I had no time left for my hobbies, friends, or even myself. She was the kind of person who asked where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing 24/7. If I missed a call, it would result in 25 missed calls and numerous text messages, inevitably leading to a fight, even if I was simply using the restroom. It reached a stage where I couldn't even play games with my friends without it causing an argument. So, eventually, we broke up, but not before she tried everything in her power to convince me to get back together. She would wait outside my workplace for me. When I left, she would follow me to my car, block me from getting in, and try to reason with me. I had enough. One night, she came by wanting to talk, so I agreed to talk with her, not really sure what else to do. Grace was also attempting to sue me over something trivial that I'd rather not detail, and she used this as a scare tactic to make me talk to her. Anyway, I sat down in her car. She was saying the same things I'd heard countless times before. I told her I was done talking, but then her dad called. She used this as a threat, saying, "If you don't sit here and talk to me, I'll have him sue you now." In response, I said, "Fuck this," and tried to leave the car. The door was locked though, so as I was unlocking it, she grabbed my arm and dug her nails into my skin. I looked at her, genuinely shocked, because her abuse had only been verbal before, never physical. I'd never seen that look on her face. It was pure malice, and I won't lie, I was quite unnerved. I'm a fairly tall guy, and she was very small, so I knew I could physically overpower her if necessary. I swung the door open and tried to step away, but she was holding me extremely tight. I told her to let me go, but she wouldn't budge. I kept pulling on my arm, trying to escape, but she wouldn't move an inch. By then, my skin was starting to tear. So I made a split-second decision and pulled her toward me onto the passenger seat, which gave me enough time to get away and into my car. I drove home faster than I ever have, and I really wish I could say that was the end of it. But of course, it wasn't. Unfortunately, Grace and I are practically neighbors. She lives a couple blocks away. That night while I was playing video games, I heard a car outside, but I sort of attributed it to my game as I recall playing GTA 5 that night. I had also smoked a little weed, so I figured that would have made any car noises seem louder. A short while passed, and as I was playing, I heard a tap on my window. I thought I was being paranoid, as weed can sometimes make me a bit edgy, especially after what had just happened. But that thought quickly vanished after I heard another tap and a female voice calling my name. I knew it was Grace, and I started to panic. My window doesn't have the best blinds, so I knew she could see me. I didn't want to open the window because, at this point, I knew she could be potentially dangerous. I pretended not to hear her, hoping she would leave, but of course she didn't. After a minute or two, she started banging on my window. Her tone shifted from soft and apologetic to aggressive and angry. I couldn't make out much of what she was saying, but it was something like, "You can't do this to me. You're an asshole," that sort of thing. I had to do something. I didn't want to bother the police, but looking back, I definitely should have called them. I made the foolish decision to open my door and ask what she wanted. I asked why she was there and why she couldn't just leave me alone. Her tone shifted again, becoming soft, and she asked for her sweater back. I yelled at her, telling her she couldn't just appear at my window at 2 a.m. asking for a sweater. Then I said if she didn't leave my property, I'd call the cops. At this point, she exploded, screaming at me while sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, I actually felt bad, but then my heart sank as I saw something that still gives me chills today. She wasn't alone. To the left of her was a thick tree in our front yard, and peering out from it was a hooded figure. She saw me looking towards the tree and knew I had seen them. She reached for my arm and grabbed me. As she did this, I saw the person run out from behind the tree, but I couldn't make out any facial features. It didn't matter because they were sprinting toward my window. In that instant, my fight or flight response kicked in, and I slammed my window shut on her arm. She screamed out in pain and pulled it back. I slammed it shut and locked it just before the other person reached my window. My heart was racing, and it felt like I couldn't breathe. I showed them my phone dialing 911, and at that point, they hurried back to her car, started it, and drove away. I was completely shocked, barely comprehending what had just happened. They sent an officer to my house. He took down my statement and said they'd call if anything came of it. Naturally, there wasn't much they could do, as there was no evidence anything happened, like with most 911 calls. As far as I know, she never faced any legal consequences. As for what they intended to do, she had also previously gotten people jumped and robbed, so I wouldn't rule out that they wanted to do that or something worse. I'm just extremely lucky that the person hiding behind the tree decided to peek out. Story 2. My name is Amy, and I haven't really slept much since last Tuesday. Not because I can't, but because I don't feel safe closing my eyes anymore. That's what happens, I suppose, when someone you believed you knew turns out capable of things you'd only expect in horror movies. I broke up with my boyfriend Tommy 3 weeks ago. It wasn't dramatic, at least not initially. We'd been dating for just under a year. In the beginning, he was sweet. He was overly attentive, constantly texting and calling, much like any partner might once. Initially, it felt like genuine love, the kind you feel lucky to have. But over time, it became possessive. He'd get upset if I took too long to reply. He'd ask strange questions like who I'd smiled at that day or if I'd noticed any guys looking at me. Sometimes he'd show up at my job unexpectedly, just standing outside the window like he was checking in. He even showed up at bars I was at with friends during girls' night out and forced me to go home with him. My friends started to dislike him for precisely these reasons. He never trusted me, but I didn't end it until he started asking if I'd ever consider putting a tracker on my phone to keep each other safe. Not sharing locations, but literally placing a tracker on my phone. That was the final straw for me. I told him it was over, and in response he cried at first, but then he fell silent. I remember hanging up on our last call with this strange tightness in my chest, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. For a little while, things were quiet. I blocked his number and tried to move on. I started going back to the gym, cooking proper meals, just trying to feel normal again. But about a week after the breakup, I started getting strange messages, not from Tommy, or at least not directly, but from random numbers with no name or context. They were short, usually just a vague single sentence. I didn't reply to any of them. That's a guaranteed way to get a spam number to know to keep harassing you. I just blocked each number as it came. I didn't tell my friends. I told myself it was probably a scam or some spam bot, because I've always gotten spam texts. But then things escalated beyond just random texts. One night, I was in bed and had to get up to use the bathroom. I went into the hallway outside my bedroom, and before entering the bathroom, I thought I heard a soft noise come from downstairs in the foyer. I'm not the type to check on a noise in the dark. I get scared, which is why I always liked being in a relationship so I didn't have to stay alone so much. I didn't go down to check it. I convinced myself it was a radiator clicking or something. I've lived in this apartment for almost 2 years, and most of that time was spent living with my ex, George, and then Tommy for the remainder, but hardly ever alone. I know the sounds it makes, and honestly, that sound was unfamiliar. So after using the bathroom, I went straight back into my room and jumped into bed, thinking the thin sheet of blanket would protect me. Another night, around 2 a.m., I could have sworn I heard a door in my apartment open from outside my room. That sound woke me up, so I wasn't 100% certain if it was real. It could have been part of my dream, perhaps. Still, my heart was racing. I texted my family group chat with my siblings and parents, simply saying, I keep hearing noises every night. I'm getting scared. Of course, they were all asleep, so I went back to sleep. That weekend, I came home from visiting my sister and immediately felt something was off. Nothing was missing or broken, but it felt like maybe doors were left open at angles they weren't left before. It might sound far-fetched, but it's true. I have a habit of leaving doors closed, or nearly closed, when I leave my apartment. All the doors were basically fully open throughout the entire apartment. There was no draft at all. I keep the air conditioning on most of the time. I walked through the apartment slowly, checking each room. My stomach dropped when I saw that the hallway closet was slightly open. Now I knew something was wrong. I always leave that closet door closed. There's no reason to leave it open, and besides, the door tends to swing out if left open. I stared at it for what felt like a full minute before I approached. When I pulled it fully open, nothing was there. Just coats and shoes as usual. That night I wedged a chair under my bedroom door and slept with a knife under my pillow. I kept the bedside lamp on. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to the sound of something moving, just a soft shuffle. I sat up slightly, confused, and then I realized the light was off and the room was dark. I looked toward the door. I could see it was open, but I had wedged a chair under it. How could it be wide open? At first, I thought maybe I dreamed wedging the chair and leaving the light on, or perhaps I'd gotten up in my sleep, but I quickly realized how wrong I was. I saw something at the foot of my bed in the dark. I swear I couldn't tell what it was. It was just some black mass in the dark. But when I finally realized what I was looking at was the top half of someone's head, it was too late because I felt two hands start touching my feet, and I completely lost it. I screamed so loud until I had no air left in my lungs, and I instantly recognized Tommy's voice telling me to calm down. But when I kept screaming, he got on top of me and put his hand over my mouth. He told me he wasn't there to hurt me, just to talk. He said he wouldn't let go of my mouth until I agreed to be quiet. So I nodded. The first thing I asked him was how he got into my apartment, and he said he made a copy of my key when we were together, just in case there was ever an emergency. He never told me he did this. Straight psychopath behavior. He must have snuck out overnight one night with my keys to make a copy somewhere. As I sat there listening to him, I debated pulling the knife, but I was too scared to do so. I knew if I did that, I had to actually be ready to use it. He kept saying over and over how he wasn't there to hurt me, just to talk, but it seemed like he was simply there to scare me into agreeing to get back with him. And I truly was too scared to say no in fear of what he might do. So I said yes, but I asked him to simply leave for the night because I was shaken. I think he was there in my bed for half an hour total before he left. And when he was gone, the first thing I did was call the police and explain the break-in. I said I was scared that he was still on the premises so that the police would actually come. When they did, I made an official police report, which I later used to file a restraining order against Tommy, with enough people backing up my claims since I couldn't actually prove he broke into my house. A detective later traced the fake numbers back to his cell phone through some fake phone number app, which was also helpful in getting the restraining order. I stayed with my parents until I was able to get a new apartment. My advice to all women out there is that at the first sign of any sort of mental illness in the man you're with, you should really consider getting away as soon as possible just to be safe. I still have to live with the trauma of waking up to him in my room, and I actually had to consider using a knife on him. Story 3. I dated Marissa for a year and a half. At first, she was one of the most intense people I'd ever met, not in a bad way. She was passionate, charismatic, and could talk about anything for hours. When she engaged with you, it was like being pulled into her world. The first few months were incredible. She'd surprise me with gifts, leave sticky notes with poems on my mirror, text me goodnight every single night without fail. But that intensity had a darker side. She didn't understand calm or waiting to see. Everything was either perfect or catastrophic. If I was 5 minutes late responding to a text, she'd send a stream of messages, first worried, then angry, and then apologizing. It worsened gradually, almost invisibly. She once accused me of cheating because I liked an Instagram post from a girl I hadn't spoken to since high school. And when I told her that something she did made me uncomfortable, she would shut down completely. I don't mean just getting quiet. I mean, she would sit in my apartment for hours, staring at the wall, just refusing to leave until I told her everything was fine. The first time she showed up at my office unannounced was 6 months in. She brought coffee and acted like it was cute, like we were some TV couple. I laughed it off, but the second time was because I hadn't answered her call. She stayed parked outside in the lot until I came down. She'd been crying. I told her it wasn't okay, and she just smiled and said, "You do the same for me, right?" I didn't have an answer for that. I kept making excuses for her. Trauma, abandonment issues, childhood stuff. I thought if I just proved I wasn't going to leave, she'd calm down. Instead, the more I gave, the more she needed. Eventually, I reached my limit. I told her it had to end. She didn't yell or cry. She just stared at me in silence for what felt like minutes. Then she nodded and said, "You think it's over for you, but it's not over for me." I remember how cold that made me feel, like it wasn't even a threat, just a fact. I blocked her on everything that same night, and I changed my number. I even asked my building manager if I could get a different unit. For a few weeks, I thought it worked. Then, the letters started showing up. The letters had no stamps or return addresses, just my name handwritten on the envelope, usually left between my door and the frame. I kept some of these notes. The first one was kind of nostalgic. It said, "I miss waking up to you. I still sleep on the side of the bed where you used to lay." The second one got stranger. It said, "You always check the door 3 times before you go to bed. You probably don't even notice it, but I do." The third letter was the one that made me pack a suitcase. It said, "You wore your blue hoodie Monday, the one with the hole in the sleeve. You should sew that up before it gets worse." That was the same hoodie I wore when I went to pick up groceries that day at a store across town in the pouring rain. I hadn't seen anyone, not a single person I recognized, but she had seen me. I knew then that moving across wouldn't be enough. I found a job in Denver, a good one. I didn't tell anyone except my brother and immediate family. I left no forwarding address. I even created a new email for the job, and I didn't link any personal info. I went completely dark. I even got a P.O. box under a false name. I thought that would be enough, and for a while, it was. Many months passed and I slept soundly. I started dating again. Nothing serious, just drinks and movies. But I was laughing again. I felt like myself. Then one Saturday, I opened my P.O. box and found an envelope. Just my name again. No stamp or return address. Inside was a Polaroid. It was of me walking my apartment building taken from behind. My earbuds were in and I had a coffee in one hand. It was cold out. You could see snow on the sidewalk and the mountains in the background. I checked the back and written in red ink, it said, "Your shoulders slouch when you're tired." I didn't wait. I moved again, faster this time. I paid cash for a rental in a different part of town, smaller building and fewer tenants. I switched jobs once again and told my boss I had family stuff and had to go fully remote. I got a rescue dog who was big and loud, a big German Shepherd mix to try and keep me sane. I deleted mostly everything online, and I had no apps or social media. I went off the grid for almost a year and heard nothing. No letters or pictures anymore. I let myself believe she was finally gone until the Post-it note. It was stuck to my front door one evening when I got home from walking the dog. It was a yellow note with red ink and it said, "I don't like the beard." My stomach actually dropped. I'd grown it out maybe 3 months prior. Nobody had seen me with it except the dog and maybe my work webcam, which I kept taped over unless on a call. I shaved it off that night. I told myself it was a coincidence, but the next morning, another note was waiting, tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. It said, "Better." I contacted the police again and filed a report. They said without threats or property damage, there wasn't anything they could do. I asked if I could file a restraining order, and they said I'd need to prove she'd been near me, which without seeing her or catching her in the act was nearly impossible. I changed my habits and started paying. Attention to every detail, like locking the doors and drawing the blinds. I didn't sleep much. I'd lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling and waiting for the floorboards to creak. 2 weeks passed with no incident. I started to wonder if maybe the notes were old. Maybe she'd left them a while ago and I'd only just noticed. But deep down, I didn't even believe that. Then one night, I woke up in the middle of the night with this horrible feeling, like someone had just been watching me, and they only just stepped out of the room. I got up and checked the doors and windows, even under the bed, like I was a kid again. Nothing was out of place. But the next morning, taped to the outside of my front door, was a small envelope, like someone had taken their time to align it perfectly. Inside was a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It was Marissa and I in a boardwalk photo booth from back when we were still together. We were smiling, and her head was on my shoulder, but her eyes had been stretched out in deep gouges like someone had used a needle or a pin. I moved again, not across town this time, but out of the city completely. I found a small cabin 3 hours into the mountains. It was isolated and surrounded by pine trees with only one road in. I paid in cash and used a fake name on the lease, which was a month-to-month system. And I left my old smartphone behind, getting a second phone number in the process. I bought a burner phone for emergencies mainly. I worked remote through a company-issued laptop that only connected through a secure VPN. No one besides my immediate family and my best friend knew where I was. I kept to myself. The only so-called visitor I got was my Uber Eats driver delivering occasional groceries. For a whole month, I barely even went into town. And it all finally worked until I heard footsteps outside, crunching the snow. My dog went ballistic. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were shoe marks and they went from window to window. There were no notes or anything left anywhere on the house, though. What else was I to assume other than it was her that she found me again, even though I still don't know for certain if that was actually her that time? I spent that entire day packing my things and driving back to my hometown. Today, I'm living in a house with 3 roommates who were in the military. If that's not a house that people know not to mess with, I don't know what is. Their pickup trucks, purple heart plates, and giant flags all over the front of the house are absolutely a deterrent to Marissa playing whatever psychopathic game she was playing. She's a mentally unstable stalker. It's clear as day, and she's a danger to herself, me, and whoever she gets involved with in the future. I just wish law enforcement was more willing to step in and do something before something really bad happens.